Hi, I'm Andrew Fisher. Welcome to the Incredible Confidence Podcast, where you can learn valuable life skills like how to find the courage to explore your individual identity in a complex social world, how to be a more confident person, and how to gain the clarity it takes to focus on your goals and start getting what you want out of life. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. In this episode, I want to talk about desire. Like I said in the last episode, I kind of grew up in my own little world. I didn't have any friends when I was really young, and I was homeschooled. We lived out in the country, so I spent a lot of time out by myself. When I was pretty young, but a little bit too old for this, I used to wet the bed. And I remember this being kind of an issue. My mom kept trying to figure out what it was and how to get me to stop, and ended up taking me in to see a doctor. And I must have been about 6 or 7 by the time it finally stopped happening. But I remember what it was that finally made it stop happening. My mom rented this book from the library, and it was about bedwetting, and it was a kid's book, but she read it to me, and that night, I didn't wet the bed. And the next morning, I woke up, and the bed was dry, and I was like, wow, something changed. And I think at that moment, at least this is the first time that I remember this happening. But at that moment, I realized that something in my brain had changed when my mom read that book to me. And I asked her to read it to me again the next night. And she said, no, read it yourself. You're old enough. And I didn't want to. I don't know why, but I wanted her to read it to me. So I didn't read it, and I wet the bed that night. Next morning, I woke up, and I realized, yes, it's got to be something in my brain. Something in my brain changes when I read the book. And I think I could have gone 2 directions with this. I could have thought that, all right, well, I've got to read the book from now on every night, or I'll wet the bed. But instead of that, what I actually ended up realizing was that whatever it is that changed in my brain when I read that book, I need to figure out how to make that happen without the book. I think probably that realization came about because I was kind of stubborn and I didn't want to read the book myself. I think if I hadn't have been so stubborn, I would have just thought, okay, I need to read the book every night. But I was too stubborn for that. So I tried to figure out a way around reading the book every night that would still get me the same result. So a little bit of laziness, a little bit of being stubborn, and a lot of genius for a 6-year-old kid or however old I was. I don't know how it was that I had that realization. It seems like it was kind of a stroke of luck. The next thing that I remember happening that kind of contributes to this story is later on when I was probably about 10 years old. I remember I was walking out in the field behind our house, and it was on our property, but it was adjacent to the neighbor's property, obviously. And the neighbors that lived back there happened to be drug dealers. And this, actually, I found this out later, that it was true that they were drug dealers, but I believe they were drug dealers even when I was a kid. I don't know if somebody said something or if that's just what I assumed, but they had Rottweilers that they had trained to guard their property so that nobody would come onto their property and in case they had a deal going on or something, I guess. I don't know. But while I was walking through our field, I looked up, and one of the Rottweilers was right there, like probably about 15 feet away from me. And I just stopped. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm this tiny little kid. I was small for my age, and this giant Rottweiler, probably bigger than I was at the time, and it's just staring at me 15 feet away. We're both facing each other, and I remember, I mean, just these thoughts are racing through my head, and I remember hearing somewhere that dogs can smell fear. And the advice that was given when I heard that was, you got to try to act like you're not afraid. Just push the fear out of your mind and try to just stand up to them and let them know that you're boss. And I'm just this little kid, but I didn't have any options. I mean, if I run, I know the dog's going to chase me, or at least that's what I think. And I'm standing there not knowing what to do. So I decided, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand up as tall as I can, and I'm going to tell that dog to go away. So I pointed back towards his house, and I said, "Go home." And the dog didn't do anything. So I do it again. I pointed the dog's house, and I said, "Go home." And I just stare. And sure enough, the dog turns around and starts walking back towards his house. And then he kind of pauses and looks back at me, and I'm still glaring, pointing. And so he just continues on and walked back to his house. And I mean, any other thing could have happened. In fact, this could have been a complete fluke. Maybe the dog just was minding his own business and didn't really care about this stupid little 10-year-old kid. But for me, the way it happened kind of solidified what I'd already learned about bedwetting. This concept that your mind can change reality. So here I was, this 10-year-old kid, and I had this kind of running through my head the rest of my upbringing, that your mind can change your reality. And I grew up in a Pentecostal family. We didn't really talk about that kind of stuff. We would talk about prayer and how you can pray to God, and He might, change your reality, I guess. He might grant you your prayer, whatever you're requesting. But the control was never within yourself, except to the extent that you could stop yourself from, sinning or whatever. You could make choices about what you did, but you couldn't affect reality. You couldn't affect the things that happened to you. Miracles might happen, but that was God, not yourself. And so I think I was kind of unique in my perspective within that social group, because I was probably the only one that was thinking those kinds of thoughts. All of my other, I mean, when I got a little older, I kind of made friends with the rest of the kids that were going to that church that we went to, and all of them kind of seemed to buy into what was taught there at that church, which was, you gotta pray and seek God and try to make good choices, and hopefully God will, see you favorably and grant you miracles or whatever. But it was always kind of this attitude of, I don't have control, that God controls everything. And my worldview, at least in that little group of people, was kind of the opposite. I mean, from that point that I remember of learning that I could stop myself from wetting the bed. And that moment of realizing that I could make without really communicating it well. I mean, because you can't communicate to a dog through your words that you're more powerful. I mean, in fact, I wasn't more powerful. If the dog had wanted to, it totally could have killed me. I mean, I was a small kid and big dog, and Rottweilers are pretty tough, and if it had wanted to, it could have killed me, but it didn't. I had somehow, at least in my mind, I had caused reality to be such that this dog followed my command. I felt like I was in control. And so all through my upbringing, I remember kind of feeling this way. I remember, when I was 14, I started going to the church school. It was a school that was run by the church. It was a little private school. I remember there were all these rules in the school. There was this uniform that you were supposed to wear, and all these things that you're supposed to do. Like before lunch every day, we would walk around the school like 4 times or something, and you had to follow all the rules and do everything right, and all the other kids did, but I didn't want to wear my uniform, so I just didn't. And whenever somebody would confront me about it, I would say, okay, yeah, I'll wear it, I'll bring it next time. And then I just didn't. And that was not the way that people behaved in that environment. And I continued this, as I got older. And it sounds like this is a good thing, but it wasn't always, because it actually ended up controlling the way that I thought about myself in a social group. I started to see how easy it is to manipulate the way other people think of you by thinking differently, and by talking differently, and by acting differently. And I started to put into practice. I mean, it started gradually. I didn't really realize it was happening, but because I grew up in that environment full of people who all kind of followed the rules, and I was kind of a kid that didn't really want to follow the rules, but at the same time, I liked kind of making everybody happy. I liked that I sort of felt this like power to make people happy by saying things a certain way, or by acting a certain way when people were around. But in my mind, I was just being manipulative. I mean, to them, I was following the rules, or at least I was breaking the rules in such a way that wasn't offensive, But in my mind, I was controlling these people because I was making them think about me differently than how I really was. I was behaving outwardly as if I was, this good kid that was following all the rules, kind of, or following some of the rules. And when I would break them, I would kind of come up with these excuses or make it seem like, okay, yeah, next time I won't do it or whatever. But I knew what was happening all along. Like, I knew what my plan was. My plan was to break as many rules as possible and just carry on without getting in trouble for it. And so the way that affected me as I got older was I started to move this philosophy into more of my professional and social worlds. So as I went out to get a job, I always felt like I was in control of every situation, which is good and bad. It's good because, if I ever felt like I needed to get a job or whatever, I always felt like it would be possible. All I need to do, I would think, is I need to figure out what that position, that job, what they want, and I need to communicate effectively with the managers or boss or whoever would be hiring, and it kind of, in my mind, I was thinking like manipulate them into giving me a job. And the reason that that's problematic is because it started making me feel like I wasn't being true to who I was. I had this great skill of kind of being a chameleon and morphing myself into what it was that somebody else wanted. I did that in my relationships too. As I got older and I started dating, which I talked a little bit about in the last episode, eventually when I started dating, I was following all this material that I was reading about pickup artists, and I took the things that I was learning and I molded myself into this person that was kind of dateable. But it made me feel like fake. It made me feel like nothing, that like the entire reality that I was constructing wasn't real. I would get these girls to date me, and I would keep them dating me by pretending to be different than I was. I would get really good at making a girl feel like I was a nice guy, and which I was a nice guy, but I would do it in such a way that wasn't authentic, where I would make a girl think that I was interesting, and but it was all planned out, and it felt like I was trapped in this fake reality that I was constructing. Like I was living kind of a movie or something. And I remember one of the relationships that I ended up having, the girl was in love with me, and I didn't even really like her that much. I mean, I did, but not as much as she liked me. And this went on for years. And that wasn't the only relationship like that. That there were several like that. And it was always this imbalance. And if it wasn't a girl that liked me more than I liked her, then it was the opposite, because since I was so good at changing myself into being somebody for a girl, then if I finally ran into a girl that didn't like me, I would be putting all this effort into trying to be a certain person so that girl would like me. And then it was like the opposite. Like, here this girl doesn't care about me, and I'm going crazy over her because all I can think about is, why won't she like me? So, as I started growing in my confidence and kind of letting this stuff go, letting go of the idea of what a girl thought of me, and it kind of solidified over the last year. But really the last 5 years I've been thinking about this kind of stuff. I want to take, and I have been taking this idea of being able to control your world and kind of turn it on its head. There's this there's this idea out there called, well, it's referred to as the secret or the law of attraction, which I'm sure you've heard of. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically the idea that you can change your reality by thinking about it. Basically, the stuff that I was thinking when I was 6 years old and 10 years old and my whole life, there's a philosophy about it, and I didn't know this, but it already exists, and it has for a long time. But I think that it's problematic for the reasons that I already talked about, but also because you can't always control your reality. There are times when you run into something that won't change, or even if it would change, it would change after you put way too much effort in, and you really shouldn't. Like, maybe there's girls that I could have got to date me. In fact, my last relationship, I possibly, maybe, could have made it work if I had sacrificed enough. But that is not a healthy way to live. You can't be making choices in your life to sacrifice more than what you're willing to sacrifice. I mean, obviously. And so there are times when you can't attract something into your life, because if you were to put the effort in to make it happen, you wouldn't be happy. And so I think it's actually unhealthy to think about the law of attraction in that way, the way that it's presented. And I've actually been thinking about it a different way that I feel like is completely changing the way that I approach the world. And I think I've never heard of it said this way before. And so I hope that you'll pay attention for a minute, because this could change your life. It has changed mine, and it could change yours. Here's the way I look at it now. I think rather than I control reality by thinking about it a certain way, I think it's more like me and reality kind of come to terms through me coming to terms with what I really, really want, as opposed to what I think I want. So let me explain. You have desires, and then you have deep, deep desires. You might have a desire like you see this girl walking by and you're like, wow, she's gorgeous. Or you see this, if you're a girl, you see this guy walking by, or whatever you're attracted to. But maybe you're also already in a relationship. So you have to ask yourself, well, which do I really want? And sometimes it's really difficult to figure it out. You know, it could be, I remember, this is sort of a silly example, but it took me like 6 months one time when I was just trying to buy a blender, because it's so difficult to figure out what you want sometimes. I mean, did I want to go to Walmart and buy the cheapest blender that they had? Or do I want to go with a mid-range blender? And if so, which one? Or do I want to go out and buy the most expensive blender I could find, or, you know, a really good one like a Blendtec or something like that? It took me maybe more than 6 months, but it took me a really long time to figure out which blender I wanted. And I think that's kind of the problem, is that sometimes it takes a really long time to figure out what you want. So I guess my point is that I think that it's really important to recognize that the difficulties that you're going to run into as you try to get what you want out of life, as you go through life and make choices and, try to be happy, the difficulty that you're going to run into, the biggest hurdle is going to be learning to tune into what it is that you really, really want. And I'm kind of agnostic, but I think that even if you're not, that this will make sense. Whether there's a God or not, the universe, or let's call it God in case you believe in one, wants you to be happy. You have deep, deep desires in you that I feel like if there is a God, those deep desires are God trying to tell you where you need to be happy, where you'll be the happiest. And then there's all these distractions on top of that. There's, all the things that you see in advertisements, or there's insecurities that you have and fears that kind of cloud your thinking. And then there's your friends and family that you're worried about offending, or worried about, being embarrassed around. So there's what you really, really want, and then there's all these things on top of that distract you from what you really, really want. So your job in life is to tune into those deep, deep desires that you have and learn to ignore everything else. And that sounds so simple, but it's not. It takes a lot of concentration and courage, really, to tune into what you really, really want. Because you've got to stop letting your insecurities and your fears and all the distractions, you've got to stop letting those things get in the way. And it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's not hard in the sense of, getting up early and working out in the sun. It's not that kind of hard. It's a different kind of hard. It's kind of stressful, and it's definitely embarrassing and anxiety inducing, because you're going to have to do things in your life that are going to embarrass you. You're going to have to do things. If you want getting what you want out of life to be your goal, then you're going to have to do things that seem like weird or make you feel uncomfortable. Because there are going to be times when your deep, deep desire is to tell somebody that you really like that you don't want to be around them anymore. Or to stand up in a social situation and say something that makes you feel weird. You're going to have to take stands that make you feel like the weirdest person, because there's nobody around you is going to be doing this. And that's the whole thing. I mean, that's why getting what you want out of life is difficult, because you've got to be comfortable in your own skin, even when that means doing things that are socially unacceptable. Now, most of the time, you're not going to have to do that kind of stuff. But I think that it's necessary to be ready for that, because we're taught our entire lives that you need to follow the social rules. You need to, care about certain things. We're taught our entire lives that. And so going against that is going to take some practice. For example, I'll give you some things that I've done that have helped me practice this. And they're going to sound silly and stupid, but But I'm glad that I did them, because now there's so many other things that I've been comfortable doing that I wouldn't have been. I'll give you the first example that I'm thinking of. A long time ago, I don't know, probably 7 years ago or something, I used to go down to a store and buy those big poster boards and markers, and I would go downtown and I would make these signs, and they would say the most random things. I mean, I made one that said purple, and I would stand there in front of the busiest road in downtown Boise, which is the city where I live. I'd go down there and I'd hold this sign that said purple. And I felt like such an idiot. But I knew. I mean, this was my thing that I needed to do to get over my social anxiety. This was just one of the steps. So I would just hold a sign. And I made myself stand there for sometimes a couple hours or whatever. But I would do this week after week. I mean, I don't know how many times I did that. But it got to be kind of a thing where sometimes people would come by and want to do it with me, which was both helpful and also kind of, I don't know, it made me feel, I didn't really know how to feel about it, because the whole point of what I was doing was for myself to get over my anxiety. So having people there next to me it didn't help me get over my anxiety at all, because here I was not being the weird person anymore. I'm doing something funny and everybody wants to join in. It was hardest when nobody was there. I'm just there alone and I'm holding a sign. Another thing that I used to do is I used to walk downtown, and I would not have anything to do for a while, so I would just stand in one position on the corner of a road or something on the sidewalk, and I'd just stand there and wait until I felt any inclination to go any direction. And if I didn't feel an inclination to go any direction, then I would just stand. And sometimes I would feel an inclination to go one direction, and so I'd just start walking slowly until I just felt like stopping. And I felt like such a weirdo. I mean, I had to look like a crazy person. I'm sure I did. Just wandering around downtown Boise with nothing to do and like obviously not doing anything, just staring at traffic. But this is the kind of stuff that I had to do. And I did so many different things like this. I mean, over and over and over, I can think of instances where I did ridiculous things just to get over my anxiety. And still, to this day, it's difficult sometimes to take a stand and do something that I want to do. That's how hard it is to go against the social norms. That even after doing ridiculous things for years, just so that I could push myself through that fear of, what's someone going to think of me if I do something different? Even after years of that, I still have difficulties sometimes. But I think it's really important to make that a priority. So, when I'm talking about worldviews, I think it's really important to understand that yes, anything is possible. You can attract anything you want into your life. I mean, I think kind of like the law of attraction, that you really can. I mean, whether it's through some magical force or God or however you want to explain it, even if it's just like the idea that when you focus on something, you make it happen because, you're putting all your energy into this thought. And so, of course, you're going to start moving in that direction. However you want to explain it, I do believe that you can attract what you want into life and into your life. And I believe, I mean, I've had this kind of thing happen over and over and over. I mean, I'll give you an example from actually something that my ex-girlfriend did that just blew me away. But she had this kind of stuff happen to her all the time, and it's one of the reasons that I was so in love with her. But one time we were in another state, and we were going to be coming back to Idaho, but I went over there to visit her, and we were there for a month. And she had this vision, kind of, where she was closing her eyes and she saw this artist that she really liked. He was a famous artist. She saw a vision of this artist in one of his paintings. You know, it was a painting that he had in his style, but he was the one in the painting. And then she had a dream about the same thing. And she told me that, you know, when I was visiting her, that before she left the state, she was going to see this guy. She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but she was going to see him. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. But, you know, a month goes on and we never saw the guy, and then we're about to leave, still hadn't seen the guy. We get to the airport, we got our bags, we get in line to you know, get our tickets, and in line in front of us was this guy, this famous artist. And I was like, there's the guy right there. And it didn't even really faze her, because those kinds of things happen to her all the time. And I've had things like that happen to me, not quite as much, but I've had weird things where I kind of had the sense that something was going to happen, or I wanted something to happen and then it did. So I do believe that you can attract what you want into life. I do believe that there's some kind of connection between what you want and what will happen. I think about it this way. I think what you want is a better indication of what will happen in the future than what you think will happen. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I grew up in a environment where we talked about faith a lot. And faith was kind of this big deal. And faith was kind of seen as a symbol of, you know, if you had enough faith, then something would happen. So the more faith you had that something would happen, then the more likelihood that it would happen. And I see this in life outside of religion. You know, people have this concept that if they really think something's going to happen, then it's going to happen. But I think it's more accurate to say that if you want something to happen, then it'll happen. I think it's a much better indicator of what will happen. Tuning into what you want is so powerful. I mean, I've been doing it more and more over the past year after my last relationship ended. And I've had such incredible experiences. And it keeps getting more intense. Like, things have been happening where it feels like miracles, kind of. It feels like, you know, the kinds of stuff that I used to be taught in my church and never really believed. Those are the kinds of things that have been happening to me now, that I'm seeing it this way, tuning into my desires and kind of sort of giving in to them in a way, like letting them guide me almost religiously towards where it feels like I need to be. You know, your desires will and can guide you if you let them. But like I said, there's so many distractions that stop us from getting there. So I think it's really important to tune into that, to tune into your desires, listen to them and follow them, and get rid of the anxiety that holds you back from doing that. I know it might be a little weird to have an entire episode dedicated to desire, but I think it's really important because your desire is the only thing that defines where you're going to end up. Yes, there are limitations. Yes, there are, difficulties that you'll run into, but your desire and how much you pay attention to it totally will change your reality completely. If you put all of your focus and interest and energy into listening to your desires, nothing can stop you. So, I felt like it would be good to have kind of a foundation on which to build all the other lessons. The most important thing, though, is pay attention to your desires. Take time out of every day to sit down and listen to your desires. I know it sounds so rudimentary and so silly and maybe downright stupid, but it's not. I mean, one thing that you can do, if you don't want to go down to the city center and hold a sign that says purple, one thing that you can do that isn't that weird, in fact, a lot of people already do this, and you might already do it, take some time out of each day to just be silent. Now, whether you meditate or you might even pray in your, quietly to yourself, or just lay down and stare at the ceiling. Whatever it is, take some time out of each day to just be quiet and just listen. Turn off your phone. Don't go check your email or anything. Just be quiet and sit by yourself. If you haven't done this, you might be surprised at how much it changes. I mean, like I said, I'm agnostic, but I do this every day. I kind of pray, actually. I sit down and I say this prayer, so I'm not totally silent, but I'm quiet by myself and turn the lights out, and I just kind of speak my mind freely. I say what it is that I want. I speak out what my internal dialogue is. I say my insecurities out loud, and I say, what I want to happen, what I hope happens, my fears of, that it might not happen. I go through this, and I try to do it every day, sometimes a couple times a day. Sometimes I'll go down by the river. There's a river going through our town. I go down by the river and I'll just sit there and watch the water go by. I try to do that every day. I try to take time out of each day to just be quiet or be by myself and not so distracted. So however you want to do that, I challenge you to do that, because you're going to be surprised by how many questions in your life get answered, and how many kind of miraculous things start happening because of it. Really, this is one of the things in my life that has changed the most. I mean, strange things have happened just because I've taken the time out of one day or another to really listen to my thoughts and just be alone with them. I might have another episode in this podcast series to talk about this concept of prayer or meditation, because I think it's so important. But the most important part is to just listen for your desires. Let them come up, and your fears and insecurities too. I mean, give them the time of day and kind of state them to yourself or, out to the world, so that you're not letting them keep your desires underneath them. I mean, that's what we typically do. We typically just let our insecurities and our fears kind of quelch any sort of desires that might come up. We just sort of listen to the insecurities first, and we ignore the desires. But take time out of each day to do the opposite, and you're going to be really surprised with what comes of it. So I challenge you to do that, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for listening. Andrew Fisher, signing off.